I'd like to ask this group a question, and something, Don, you said. Wounding the spirit of your wife. And the long list, 3-4 pages, single space, legal pad. That's a lot of wounds. And with that many wounds, I just, you have an itinerant, Steve Canfield here, and academician, I'll call him. And Sammy International Ministry travels a lot. Steve takes his family with him. And International with Sammy and Don, you just heard his testimony, and Bill, a local pastor, local church pastor. So do you ever wound the spirit of your wife in your marriage? The answer is yes. Good. How do we wound the spirit of our wives? What are some ways, practically, that you have found you've wounded the spirit of your wife along the way?
I guess if I had $1 for every time I'd ask my wife, forgive me for being insensitive, I'd be a millionaire. And the issue of just insensitivity to where she's at and what I expect of her. And I think sometimes as men, we can rumble through our schedule and through our life and just kind of expect our wife to follow in that. And just forget that she is a weaker vessel and that she has different needs and different expectations. And just running roughshod in our goal to accomplish good things, but yet just the lack of sensitivity to where she's at and what her needs are and her time of the month and her period of life and just all the things that I don't understand. I have 5 sons and 1 daughter, and now that I have a daughter who's coming into that age, it's a whole new ballgame, and women are different, and not being sensitive to those times and those needs is probably a great failure that I've experienced.
I'm not going to answer the questions anymore, but this one I've got to give an illustration. Last night, it was late. I was tired. I've been here, I don't know how many days. It seems like 8, 9 days. God's working in hearts last night, and he's working in my heart, my wife's heart. It must be 11 or 11:30, and Sue starts sharing something God's doing in her heart, and I'm listening as I'm doing email. And insensitivity, Steve. And I'm hearing it in one ear, and we're multitask men, and she came to bed, and it was obvious. I mean, it's obvious. And she said, Byron, all I wanted was you to listen and then take me in your arms and hug me and pray with me. This morning I asked forgiveness for being insensitive, Steve. Others, how are we insensitive?
I spoke last night a little bit about what I went through in that first great revival in my heart, and it was in relationship to my wife. And there were 2 issues of insensitivity that I had to deal with. One was I quite often in the ministry made my wife feel like she was not needed, that I was just doing the ministry, and boy, I was going great guns, and she often got the feeling I could do it without her. I could do it just as well, and it wasn't that way, but I left her that feeling and giving her the feeling of not being needed. The second thing was that I did that God really dealt with me about during that time was that her opinion was not important. I mean, I had all the knowledge, I had all the answers. It was my opinion that was important, and that not listening to her opinion and valuing her opinion and her view and trying to listen to that. Those were 2 ways in which I wounded her deeply, and that's what caused her to withdraw into her shell.
I think in the same, just to follow up on that, some guys have different opinions about this, about how much you tell your wife about the ministry. I've heard guys who say, well, I don't tell my wife any of the details of what's going on in the church. Maybe they have some biblical reasoning for that. I've never found that to be a right approach. But when I even though I know better, when I don't include my wife in my life, and that means for me, my life is my ministry, and our ministry. Then, and the proud thing about that is that God has given her to me in an incredible way to balance my life. And I, it's not just a matter of I need to bring her into what I'm wrestling with, what I'm struggling with, the burdens I'm carrying, just so she'll feel like she's a part. That's pretty arrogant, honestly. It's a little bit. The reality is God's given her. She's the other half of me, and I desperately need the balance that she brings, the insight that she brings. When I don't do that, it is a dishonoring thing to her, and she feels alone. I mean, she's expressed this to me when I've done it, which is on multiple occasions, but it makes her feel very alone and isolated from me.
Some ways we wound the spirit of our wife. Elsie, right?
Yeah.
What a gem she is and was.
When Elsie and I got married, I had a passionate love for the ministry. God had done something in my heart, and God had given me called me and given me the privilege of being in His ministry, and I lost myself in it, and I treated her as a tack-on, and she was to my advantage without my even knowing I was doing it, and that's the best way I know how to describe it. I treated her as a tack-on to me, and slowly I began to realize that she was more important in this ministry than I was. It took me a while. But she knew a lot more about prayer than I knew, and she did it. I sometimes think she did it because of the desperation of her living with me. But I found out that she had depths and dimensions that I didn't have. It took me over a period of time over that. And ultimately, we got to the place where I shared with her everything, and she responded and carried the load. She carried loads that I didn't even know she carried. I wasn't sensitive enough. I didn't have the depth of sensitivity to realize the depths of the dimensions that she carried. I shifted careers 5 times. I never heard a complaint out of her, except for one time. And one time she and I just differed totally on what the will of the Lord was for us. But she followed me. When we got married and we walked out of the church and sat down in a Ford automobile, she left everything and gave herself to me. I always thought of her as a bit like Abraham, just leaving everything. Her cultural background was different from mine, higher, many other things. But she went with me anywhere I went, and never once did I ever hear her complain about deprivations as I brought her out of the north into the south, and parsonages that you wouldn't want to live in now, this kind of thing. But she had a commitment to God that kept her through that, and that when the battle came toward bitterness, God gave her grace to survive the battle of bitterness, of my neglect of her. And I want to say that over the years that God helped and changed that. One of the revelations to me was when I came to the place where I ultimately found I was much more fulfilled meeting her needs than having her meet my needs. That was a total reversal, a total reversal. When I got to the place where there was more joy in fulfilling her needs than there was mine. And I thought, this is a work of God and a work of grace. And most of you heard me say yesterday, the last year she had cancer. And it's the greatest year we ever lived.
Byron, there's something that's not, I don't think I've had this problem, but I know a lot of guys have had it. And about 2 to 3 years ago, I saw this happen. I was invited to speak in South Africa. It was a consultation. All the organizations working in Afghanistan were coming together, and we had just held a meeting with Afghan believers, first meeting ever for international conference. And so these organizations heard about it, and at the last minute they asked me to come to South Africa to this consultation and speak. And I went there and spoke on revival. And God was working. The guy who was in charge of the consultation the last morning said, "Can I have breakfast with you?" And I said, yes. And he began to tell me that he and his wife had started this consultation with all the organizations. They had this deep commitment to reaching Afghanistan. And then he said, but my wife has quit coming because she feels that I love Afghanistan more than I love her. And he said that and he showed me his finger. He says, I even have a ring that I wear as a significance of my commitment to Afghanistan. And I said to him, there is nothing save Jesus that you can love more than your wife. And you must lay this at the feet of Jesus. And God did a deep work in his life. And that morning after I preached, he stood up with tears flowing down and said that he was resigning his position because he wanted his wife to know. And he took the ring off and said, I'm only married to my wife. And I think what he had done with that ring was very significant, because I think a lot of people in ministry, their wives feel that they're married to the ministry rather than to them. And they need to have that sense that you're married to me, not this ministry.